Welcome to the deep dive. We know biochemistry, especially biological oxidation and energy stuff, can feel, well, pretty overwhelming for first-year med
There's
students.
a lot, yeah.
So our mission today is to kind of cut through that complexity. We want to give you a really solid conceptual overview of how the cell powers itself, the core ideas you really need.
And the absolute center of that is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The sources all hammer this home. It's the cell's energy currency. Can't live without it.
Right.
But, before you can spend money, you got to understand the economy, the rules. That's bioenergetics.
Okay, bioenergetics. So it's like biochemical thermodynamics sets the stage.
Exactly. It studies how energy changes,
Yeah.
how it's transferred, how it's used in reactions. And critically, it only really cares about the start and the end point, the energy difference.
Not the messy middle bit.
Not the path, just the states.
Got it. And the key number here is free energy delta G. That's the usable energy.
That's the one. The energy available to actually do work.
Yeah.
And remember that equation, delta G equals delta H minus T delta S.
Yeah, enthalpy minus temperature times entropy, heat content and disorder. Still getting my head around that sometimes.
Well, the bottom line for delta G is negative means go. It's exergonic, energy releasing, spontaneous, like rolling downhill.
Okay.
Positive delta G means you need to put energy in. It's energonic, non-spontaneous, uphill.
Okay, wait. If reactions need a negative delta G to go, but building things, anabolism, that often requires energy, so positive delta G, how does a cell pull that off? Seems like it shouldn't work.
But here's the cell's trick. It's coupling. Delta G values are additive, you see.
Additive.
Yeah. The cell links an energetically unfavorable reaction, one with a positive delta G, to a highly favorable one, usually ATP hydrolysis, which has a big negative delta G.
So the overall sum is negative.
Exactly. If the total delta G for the coupled reactions is negative, the whole process moves forward. The favorable one basically pulls the unfavorable one along.
Okay, that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
using a strong engine to tow something heavy.
Perfect analogy.
So if delta G sets the rules, then these high energy compounds, that's where the actual energy, the money, is stored.
That's the cellular wallet, yeah. We define them as compounds that release a good chunk of energy on hydrolysis, typically at least 7 kilocalories per mole, way more than low energy ones.
And we see that little wavy line symbol, the tilde. That usually means high energy bond, right? Like an AMPPP.
Precisely. Often a phosphoanhydride bond.
And there are different types. Pyrophosphates like ATP itself, acyl phosphates.
Lyonyl phosphates, phosphagens like phosphocreatine, and importantly, thioesters like acetyl-CoA.
Acetyl-CoA, right. That's the non-phosphate one to remember.
Yeah, it releases about 7.7 kilocalmol. But ATP is king, really. Its hydrolysis gives about negative 7.3 kilocalmol standard free energy change. It's the central link.
Explain that cycle, the ATP-ADP cycle. Why is it the currency and not just like a big savings account?
Because it's constantly turning over. It's used, then remade, used, remade. It connects catabolism, breaking stuff down to release energy, with anabolism, building stuff up, which uses energy.
So it's the go-between.
The energy shuttle, constantly moving energy from fuel breakdown to cellular work, like muscle contraction or making new molecules.
And making that ATP, regenerating it. There are two main ways. Substrate-level phosphorylation.
Yep, direct transfer, like you see in glycolysis.
And the big one, oxidative phosphorylation. That's tied to the mitochondria, right?
That's the main powerhouse.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Linked to the electron transport chain. And don't forget the quick backup.
Phosphocreatine.
Yeah, in muscle and brain. For when you need ATP fast, it's a phosphagen, a readily available high-energy reserve.
Okay, so we have the rules, bioenergetics, the currency, ATP. Now, how do we actually get the energy from our food into that ATP biological oxidation?
That's the core process. It boils down to electron transfer, oxidation, loss of electrons, reduction, gain of electrons, always happen together.
A redox pair.
Exactly. And we measure the tendency for this with redox potential, E0.
E0. That tells you how much something wants electrons or wants to give them up.
Pretty much. Electrons naturally flow from a pair with a more E0 wants to lose electrons to a pair with a more positive E0 wants to gain them.
Like water flowing downhill.
Precisely. And the biggest hill in the cell is the electron transport chain, the ETC.
Right, you see that huge drop from NADH with its negative E0 around negative 0.32 volts.
All the way down to oxygen, the final acceptor, with a really positive E0 plus 0.82 volts.
Wow, that's a drop of over a volt, 1.14 volts. That's the energy waterfall we're tapping into.
That potential difference is what drives the whole ETC machinery. And where does this happen?
The mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell.
Inside the mitochondria, specifically on that highly folded inner mitochondrial membrane, those folds are called cristae.
And that membrane is packed with the machinery, the ETC complexes.
Yep, complexes I through YV are the electron carriers, and that complex V is the ATP synthase, the enzyme that actually makes ATP.
So walk us through the electron path. Where do they start?
They come in carried by NADH and FADH2, which got them from breaking down food molecules. NADH usually drops its electrons off at complex 1. FADH2, from reactions like the succinate dehydrogenase step in the Krebs cycle, drops them off at complex 2.
Then where?
From complex I and 2, the electrons funnel into a mobile carrier called coenzyme Q, or ubiquinone. Think of it as a collection point.
Like a shuttle bus in the membrane.
Sort of, yeah, it's a lipid-soluble. Then CoQ passes them to complex 3.
Okay.
Complex 3 passes them to another mobile carrier, cytochrome C.
Another shuttle.
Yep, this one's a protein. Cytochrome C then carries them to the final complex, complex 4.
Complex 4, that's cytochrome oxidase, right? The really crucial one.
That's the one. It contains cytochromes A and A3. It's unique because it's the only component that directly reacts with molecular oxygen.
Yeah, and it needs iron and copper to do that.
Yes, both heme, iron, and copper ions are essential for it to take those electrons and safely reduce oxygen to water. That's the final step of the chain.
Phew. Okay, so electrons flow, oxygen gets reduced to water. But where does the ATP come in? That's oxidative phosphorylation, isn't it?
Exactly. Oxidative phosphorylation is coupling that electron flow energy to the synthesis of ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate.
And we measure the efficiency with the PO ratio, ATP made per pair of electrons.
Right. Now, the older textbooks often say 3 ATP per NADH and 2 per FADH2.
Yeah, I remember those numbers.
But more current measurements, based on the actual mechanism, put it closer to 2.5 ATP for NADH and 1.5 for FADH2.
Huh. Why the change?
It relates to the number of protons pumped at each step and how many protons it actually takes to drive the ATP synthase. It's not quite neat whole numbers.
So it's a bit less efficient than we thought, thinking about that energy balance. Oxidizing NADH releases about 52 kilocalmol, but we only capture around 22 kilocalin in ATP.
That's right. The efficiency is around 40–45%. Maybe 42% is a good number to keep in mind.
So over half the energy is lost, or not lost, but released as heat.
Releases heat, yeah. And that heat isn't waste. It's vital for maintaining our body temperature. It keeps us warm. And it helps in the membrane fluidity, keeps the reactions running.
Ah, okay. So how does the cell actually do this coupling? How does electron flow make ATP? Not the old chemical intermediate idea.
No, that didn't pan out experimentally. The accepted mechanism is Peter Mitchell's chemiosmotic hypothesis. Brilliant idea.
Chemiosmotic. Sounds complicated.
The concept is actually pretty elegant. As electrons move through complexes I, E3, and 4, the energy released is used to pump cotons, H+ ions,
Hydrogen ions.
from the mitochondrial matrix across the inner membrane into that inner membrane space.
So you're building up a higher concentration of protons outside.
Exactly. You create a proton gradient. It's like charging a battery.
Yeah.
You have more positive charge and a lower pH, more acidic, in the inner membrane space compared to the matrix.
Okay, a stored energy gradient. Then what?
Then that stored energy is used by complex V, the ATP synthase. It has a channel called F0, FRO, that lets the protons flow back down their gradient back into the matrix.
Following the gradient, releasing the stored energy.
And that flow of protons drives the synthesis of ATP. It's amazing. Paul Boyer figured out the mechanism, the binding change model,
The molecular motor.
the world's smallest molecular motor. The proton flow through F0 actually causes a part of the enzyme, the gamma subunit, to physically rotate inside the F1 part.
It spins.
It spins, and that spinning forces conformational changes in the F1 subunits, where ADP and phosphate bind. They cycle through loose, tight, and open states.
Loose binds them. Tight makes the ATP.
Open releases the newly made ATP. It's mechanical energy conversion.
That is genuinely incredible. Okay, but complex systems can break. What happens if you throw a wrench in the works? Inhibitors.
Right, and these inhibitors are actually useful tools for studying the chain because they block specific steps.
Like rotenone. Fish poison?
Yep, rotenone and the barbiturate amidyl block complex 1. Antimycin A blocks complex 3.
And the really nasty ones hit the end?
Yeah.
Complex 4.
Yeah, cyanide, carbon monoxide, atomazide. Iodide is incredibly potent because it binds tightly to the iron and cytochrome oxidase complex.
Stops oxygen from binding.
Stops the electrons from getting to oxygen. The whole chain backs up instantly. Electrons pile up, oxygen can't be used, tissue asphyxia. Very bad news.
Yikes. Okay, what about blocking the ATP synthesis part directly?
Oligomycin is a classic one. It blocks the F0 proton channel in ATP synthase. Protons can't flow back in.
So the gradient builds up too high.
Builds up so high it actually stops the ETC from pumping more protons, back pressure. Then there's the attractylase side, which blocks the transporter that brings ADP into the matrix. No ADP, no ATP synthesis.
Got it. And then there are uncouplers. They sound different.
They are. Uncouplers don't block electron flow or ATP synthase directly. They break the link between them. They basically provide an alternative route for protons to leap back across the inner membrane, bypassing ATP synthase. So electrons still flow, oxygen is still consumed.
But the energy from the proton gradient isn't captured as ATP.
Exactly. It's just released as heat. 2,4-dinitrophenol, DNP, is a synthetic example. High doses of aspirin can act as uncouplers too.
But there's a natural one, right? In brown fat.
Yes. Thermogenin, or UCP1, in brown adipose tissue. This is crucial for newborns and hibernating animals. They use this uncoupling to generate heat directly, non-shivering thermogenesis. It burns fuel just to stay warm.
Fascinating. And briefly, problems with this system can be inherited too. Mitochondrial DNA issues.
Absolutely. Mutations in mitochondrial DNA, which codes for some key ETC proteins, can cause diseases like Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy.
Yeah.
Affects vision.
Okay, one last piece of the puzzle. We make NADH during glycolysis out in the cytosol, but you said the inner mitochondrial membrane is picky. NADH can't just wander in.
It cannot. It's impermeable to NADH. Big problem, right?
Yeah.
It's got this energy-rich molecule stuck outside where the main ATP factory is inside.
So the cell needs a workaround. Shuttle systems.
Exactly. They don't transport the NADH molecule itself, but they transport its reducing equivalents, those high-energy electrons, across the membrane.
Clever. Two main types.
Two main ones. The glycerol phosphate shuttle is common in many tissues, like muscle and brain. It's simpler.
How does it work?
It passes the electrons from cytosolic NADH ultimately to FAD, that's part of an enzyme in the inner membrane. So it makes FADH2 inside the membrane.
Ah, FADH2. So those electrons enter complex 2.
Right, which means they bypass the first proton ponding site, complex 1. So you only get about 1.5 ATP per cytosolic NADH using this shuttle.
Right.
Less efficient.
What's the other one?
The malic aspartate shuttle. It's more complex, involves more steps and transporters, but it's used in tissues like the liver, kidney, and heart.
Why use a more complex one?
Because the payoff is better. This shuttle manages to regenerate NADH inside the mitochondrial matrix.
NADH inside. So those electrons enter at complex I.
Yep, and you get the full yield, about 2.5 ATP per cytosolic NADH, more efficient, which makes sense for high-energy demand organs.
Wow. Okay, so that ties it all together. The rules from bioenergetics, ATP is the cache, the ETC in the mitochondria is the engine, pumping protons.
And the chemiosmotic theory, explaining how that proton gradient, like a battery, drives the tiny ATP synthase motor to make the ATP, and shuttles to get the fuel in.
It's an incredibly elegant, interconnected system. So as you're revising this, really think about that efficiency. We focus on the ATP made, that 42%.
Right.
But don't dismiss the other 58% that's released as heat. Why is that heat so crucial? Not just for body temp, but maybe for keeping the whole process fluid and running smoothly? Mull that over.
Yeah, think about the whole energy flow, not just the ATP part. And maybe review those inhibitor sites that really help solidify where things happen in the chain.
Yeah.
You're building a great foundation here. Keep going.